I'm Sarah Whiteway. Kate Huber is also here from Creating Healthy Schools and Communities. And I'm pretty excited about this topic, and I hope that this is helpful to all of you who are watching it later. I can't actually click to the next slide. All right. So, Safe Routes to School is an approach that promotes walking, bicycling, rolling, any active transportation to school through infrastructure improvements, enforcement, tools, safety education, and incentives. And generally, there are two main goals to any Safe Routes to School program. The first one is to increase the number of students who are using active transportation. And then the second one is to reduce the number of traffic accidents for students that are walking, biking, and rolling to school. So those are two kind of separate goals, right? We want it to be safer for all students who are walking and biking, and we want to increase the number of people that are doing that. So next time I'm going to kind of go over the why this is something that schools are doing, that communities are finding important. So reducing the number of children who are hit by cars. I feel like that's like the most obvious thing. You don't really have to convince people that that is an important thing to do. We don't want any children to get hit by cars on their way to school. The next one is that active transportation contributes to a healthy lifestyle. So if students spend 10, 15, 20 minutes walking or biking or rolling to school and home from school, that's already adding up to 30 to 40 minutes of active time each day. It doesn't take much more to get them to that 60 minutes that the CDC recommends for daily physical activity. But without that active transportation, sometimes fitting in that 60 minutes is tough. So if we can get more students walking and biking and rolling to school, ideally we'll have a healthier general population as they grow up. And another idea is that if they're used to active transportation as children, that'll just continue throughout their life, that they'll look for jobs that are within walking, biking distance from their homes, that it'll become kind of more part of their regular lifestyle. And the next one, and I think this one's really important, is that active transportation does help foster independence. So if you are transported without you having to do anything from your house to your school every day, that's a chunk of time that you're kind of sitting there, maybe talking to your parents, which is great. But especially as kids reach middle school and high school, they really want that time with their peers. And this is a time that they can be independent, that they are making their own decisions. And if they start young and they know how to walk or bike safely, as they get older, they can kind of increase the amount of area that they feel comfortable navigating on their own, like moving up to taking public transportation, biking across the neighborhood, that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of research that shows that one of the reasons that there is such a mental health crisis among teens is because they have all of those times for them to be independent and make their own decisions are slowly being taken away from them, and they're just being told what to do all of the time. So I think anything that we can do to give teens back some of that responsibility and independence is going to be good overall for their mental health. And then active transportation prepare students for learning. So they get to school and they have already maybe chatted with friends. They've gotten a little bit of exercise. So when they get there, they're more prepared to learn. Their bodies moved, their brains awake, and hopefully they can sit and focus in class once they're at school. And then I have a few more reasons that I didn't want to go into a ton, but reducing greenhouse gas emissions is obviously important for the entire planet. Having students walking and biking helps build community. It makes communities safer to have more people on the streets. It reduces congestion around the school. So if you're worried about sort of air pollution around the school from a whole bunch of idling vehicles, the more of those that you can get rid of by having students walk and bike. The healthier the air will be for everyone to breathe. And finally, it saves money, it can save money for the families because they're not using gas to drive children to school. And if you can reduce the amount of students who are using busing and reduce the number of buses you need, it can save money for the school district. All right, so then why is this sort of something that is important now? So 55 years ago in 1969, almost 50% of students walked, biked, or rolled to school. So I've got a little infographic, and that's showing out of 10 average students how they got to school. So, somewhere between 40 and 50% used active transportation, walked or biked. Around 20% were driven to school, and around 40% took the school bus. But now, or 2009, same now, less than 10% of students are walking and biking to school, and 30% around are being bused, which is leaving about 60% being driven to school. And the infrastructure around schools is usually not set up to accommodate that many personal vehicles. So it's causing problems in terms of it's not safe for students to actually get out of those cars and get into the school because there's just so many cars around and there isn't space for them all. So we've hit a little bit of an issue where there's so few students walking and biking to school that it doesn't look like something that is doable for others to start taking on. So Safe Routes to School is kind of a program that's going to address that issue. So in a huge study, they called a large number of parents and asked them, why does your child not walk or bike to school? And this was what they found. About 60% said the distance to school was just too far. And that's a hard thing to counter. I mean, obviously biking provides an opportunity to go a further distance in less time than walking. But if the school is 8 miles from your home, you're probably not going to be sending your child to walk or bike. But there was also 30% that cited that they were worried about traffic. Almost 20% were worried about weather. Crime danger was an issue. There was some that it was against school policy to have their child walk or bike, and then a bunch of other reasons. So how do you actually create a Safe Routes to School program that addresses sort of all of those concerns and works? And Safe Routes Partnership, which is a national thought leader in Safe Routes to School, suggests these 6 areas are things that you want to include in your Safe Routes program. So engineering, equity, engagement, education, encouragement, and evaluation. And they've made them all things that start with E so that we can call it the 6 E's and remember them. So I'm going to go through each of them and give a few examples of how you actually do that. So first off, engineering. So that is physically changing the environment to make it safer, more convenient for people to walk, bike, and roll. And sort of how do you apply that in your school? So some of the things you do are you have crosswalks that are newly painted. You put in curb bump outs so there's less of a distance that students have to go across in front of cars to get to the other side. You build bike lanes. It's all that kind of stuff that can be very expensive if you're doing it to be permanent, but can also, I mean, this one at the bottom that you see, that's all just paint. That is paint on the ground. So that's not super expensive. It won't last forever, but it can give you an idea of what the environment can look like with the monetary investment. And this is also one that it takes time to make these changes. But it's the one that's going to result in that goal number 2 for this, of not just getting more students to walk and bike, but making it safer for those that already do. This is one of the ways that you really accomplish that well. All right, so the next E is equity, and that's ensuring that our Safe Routes to School initiatives are benefiting all groups, particularly low-income students, students of color, students of all genders, and students with disabilities. So one of the things that they've found is that if you're not if you're not really working on that goal of safety, then the students that have other options of how to get to school aren't walking and biking. If it doesn't feel safe, the only people that are walking and biking are those students who, for economic or whatever reasons, don't have somebody that can drive them and don't get a school bus. And what the outcome of that, really unfortunately, is that students of color and low-income students are more likely to be hit by cars on their way to school than other students. And that's something we really need to make sure we're working against. So how do you apply equity to your program? So you make sure that you are giving your messages in a multilingual way, reflecting the diversity of the students and their families. You're inviting people from the community to be part of your events, like your walk audit, so that you're really seeing things from their perspective and getting their input on what needs to be done. You're providing a district-wide or school maps of how to get to school that account for students of all of physical abilities. So not only walking and biking, but also taking into account rolling. If there isn't a ramp, you probably shouldn't be suggesting that as the safe route to school way if there's going to be a curb that doesn't have a ramp. And then make sure that your arrival and dismissal plans are incorporating students that are walking and biking. So don't have it so that the students who are walking to school have to weave their way through buses or through a crowded parking lot of parents who are, trying to drop off their students. Make sure that there's a safe crosswalk for them to get from their neighborhood into the school building. All right, next up, we've got engagement, and that's making sure that you are basically getting as much community input from your students, your parents, your families, your teachers, all of the school leaders, and existing community organizations, so that they are not only telling you their experiences, but they are also being part of the decision-making process about the way that you're going to run your program. So a few ways to do this are, sending out surveys, having focus groups, inviting people to come to these Safe Roads to School meetings or planning sessions. But it's more than that. It's not just planning something and then telling people, hey, we'd like to hear what you think about this. It's having the community members involved sort of from the beginning so that they're making the decisions. And sometimes that means having the school leaders or the Safe Routes to School experts take a back seat on the decision making and allowing that decision to be made by the people that are going to be most impacted by the program. All right, next up, we've got encouragement, and that's just making people excited about the idea of walking and biking to school. So you can do that through events, activities, and programs, and I'm going to talk about a couple of options. So some that are really popular are a walk to school day and a bike to school day, and there are national days that are designated for walk to school and bike to school, one in the fall, one in the spring, and that can be a great way of sort of getting a bunch of people walking on one day and excited about it. Walking school buses and bike buses are a way that allow a group of students to navigate from their neighborhood to the school together, maybe with adult supervision for younger students and without it for older students. But that's a fun way to, especially for parents that are worried about safety. There's always safety in numbers, so getting a group together can help. And then having contests, mileage clubs, any other incentive to kind of get more people excited about walking and biking. It's the sort of thing that feels fringe when there's only a few people doing it. But once you get a large enough number, it's just the norm for your school or your community. And that's going to be the next generation will just continue doing what has already been done. So I think these encouragement options are a really great place to start with a Safe Routes to School program. And next, there's education. So making sure students and the people that will be driving around in your community know how to safely navigate the roads as a pedestrian, as a cyclist. And if there are pedestrians and cyclists around, making sure that you're also educating the public about watching for cyclists and pedestrians, especially around schools. So some of the ways that you apply this are creating these maps of safe route to school routes so that you can hand those out and say, this is the suggested route. We've walked it, and there are crossing guards, and there are lights, and there's no missing sidewalks, things like that. Having a bicycle rodeo that teaches kids bicycling safety is a really fun way for them to learn how to make sure they're stopping at stop signs and looking for cars before they go, things like that. Having curriculum, seminars, events focused on the benefits of walking and bicycling for students and for parents and guardians can help. Any sort of traffic safety education for drivers is really key, as well as public education for safety improvement. So if you are making any of those infrastructure changes, you also want to have some signage and some flyers that go out to the neighborhood, letting them know why that's happening and how it's going to be useful. And then we've got evaluation, and that's making sure that the things you're doing are checking if they're more or less successful than the other things you're doing, making sure your programs and initiatives are supporting equitable outcomes. So some of the evaluation things you can do are a walk and bike audit and a school travel plan. So that means walking around the neighborhood and checking for safety concerns and making notes of those. And a school travel plan would be that that route that you are suggesting to students. Doing counts of bicycling and walking rates, asking students or parents how they get to school each day. That's really useful over time, so you can show if what you're doing is making a difference. Surveying parents, guardians, and students on their perceptions and attitudes. So what do they think about walking and biking? And then collecting data about car crashes near the school, traffic speeds, or number of cars. All of that information will be useful for evaluating what you're doing. All right. So the next thing is like, okay, it sounds great. How do you start? How do you start doing this? And as with everything, as with every new program, you create a committee. But I would strongly recommend that this committee is not just made up of school staff. It needs to be broader than that. And also school staff are already on so many committees, they cannot necessarily commit to being on another committee. If there is a staff member that is super passionate about it, of course, we want them on the committee. We need a couple of people from the school, but really we need students and parents and community members to make up the bulk of this committee. Have a kickoff meeting where you talk about what should be the first steps. What are you going to collect data? Are you going to do a walk to school event? What's most important? Or is it really just that you're not trying to encourage more people to walk, you're just really concerned about some crosswalks that aren't safe, need to be repainted, desperately need a crossing guard at one spot? All of those are great first steps. And then really analyzing the conditions, identifying the issues. That's kind of what I was just talking about, but what those existing conditions are might vary widely between different school buildings. Identify solutions, prioritize improvements, and then make a plan. And then my next slide is, what do you include in that plan? So you want a list of your projects. What are you going to do for education, for encouragement, for engineering, as well as equity and all of the other E's? You don't need to have something for every one of the E's. You can have a successful Safe Routes to School program and not have any big engineering changes. It can just be kind of mostly encouragement and education. That's still a Safe Routes to School program. You want to set some long and short-term priorities and goals. You want to identify what partnerships you have. Do you have partnerships with the police department, with the town board? and where you're going to get funding from. New York State doesn't have specific Safe Routes to School funding. They've kind of rolled that into other larger grants. But there is ways to get a little bit of funding. There's also ways to do a lot of these kind of program components that don't cost much. And then you're going to evaluate, assess, adjust, and repeat that all over and over again until you've made all of the changes that you really need to make. That's all that I have on sort of an introduction to Safe Routes to School. We are going to be holding 2 more webinars this year on more specific Safe Routes to School things. So on February 7th, we're going to be talking about walk and bike to school days and how you organize one of those. And then on May 1st, we're going to be talking about setting up a bike bus program. And I called it bike bus, but I think it's also going to include walking school bus. So one day for like the 1-day event, and then another webinar for a more long-term program. And I hope that you'll join us for those ones. And I've got a few resources. SafeRoutesInfo.org is a great site for some sort of basics. Safe Routes to School partnership, or Safe Routes Partnership, has so much information. If you're looking for something New York specific, there's a Safe Routes to School curriculum. And then I wanted to mention that if you're looking to do sort of a after school bike program, Go Bike Buffalo has one for schools in our area. It involves children learning sort of bike maintenance and mechanics by putting together a bike, as well as biking safety, and they go on a bike ride in the neighborhood. And that's kind of an after school. I think a pretty small group of students would take part in that. There's a cost to it, but if you are part of CHISC and you have funding through us, some of that funding could be used to have an after school recycle a bicycle program at your school. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't have any questions, just a comment. When you were talking about making sure that you're educating drivers, wondering if it would be helpful to connect with driver ed programs and or to find out if there's any education already included in those programs, as we have new drivers, right? It's something that should just be embedded for all drivers. I don't know if those of us that are old got that when we were in driver ed. I don't think we did, but
I would hope that that's automatically included in driver's ed, but I'm not sure if it is.
Yeah. Many schools don't even have driver's ed anymore. Like it's not a school-based program anymore.
Yeah.
Lots of schools. And then I have a comment about Go Bike.
Yeah.
Their program in school. I'm familiar with it in Heights Elementary School in Buffalo Public 80. That they did that a few different years. And the group of kids, how that runs is Go Bike brings bikes, and the group of kids each gets a bike and works on it and brings it up to rideable standards, and then they ride the kids home through the neighborhoods, and they absolutely love it, and they become bikers for life.